Greetings, fellow moviegoers, and welcome to Movie Central, the place to talk about movies, TV shows based on movies, toys based on movies, games based on movies, and rides based on movies. I'm your host, Mr. CCS, and these are my pets, George the Gorilla, Hollow the Dolphin, and Frank the Sea Turtle. You know, I do the scream, but I have no passion to do it this time around because the film we're going to be talking about today is extremely underwhelming to the point where I don't really have any passion to do it. But at the same time, we're still talking about a franchise that's super iconic, and I did it last week, so I guess I will now. Mortal Kombat!
Okay, so it's important to remember that the original Mortal Kombat film from 1995 was a big hit at the box office, so naturally a sequel was in order. This time around, the film would focus on the two most recent games of the series, which would be the third and fourth entries, and would be geared towards the fans of the games a lot more, or at least that's what the intention was. The film would not be directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, but rather by cinematographer of the first film, John R. Leonetti, who went on to direct some crappy horror movies after this film. The film was released in the fall of 1997, to largely negative reviews and poor box office. This film led to Paul W.S. Anderson vowing to never leave a series he started again, which is why he stuck with the Resident Evil films for as long as he did, and for good reason. This film is still considered one of the worst video game films of all time, and even one of the worst films of all time in general. I mean, can it really be that awful?
Let's do our best to find out. This is the 1997 train wreck, Mortal Kombat Annihilation.
Every generation, a portal opens up between the outer world and Earth. Emperor Shao Kahn, played by, of all people, Brian Thompson, ruler of the mythical outworld, pounces the moment the portal reopens and slips through with his mighty warriors intent on total domination and uniting the two worlds. Like, I haven't heard that one before. However, he only has 7 days to complete his task. In the meantime, opposition grows and the warriors, Sonya Blade, played this time by Sandra Hess, Jax, played by Lynn Red Williams, Katana, played again by Talisa Soto, and Liu Kang, played by Robin Shou again, get ready for war.
Okay, so this film, as previously stated, is regarded as one of the worst video game films of all time, but even as far as one of the worst films of all time in general. What are my thoughts on it? Yeah, it's bad. Many of those criticisms of MK Annihilation come from the fact that its writing is awful, the acting is cheesy, and the action is too over the top. The biggest problem with this film, to me at least, is that it's boring. It's so incredibly boring. Not only is this story less interesting and easy to follow, but it's also lost me near the climax. And that's where I'm supposed to be the most invested. I barely remember how the third act ends. That's never a good sign. But it's bad for an action movie, let alone Mortal Kombat. Yeah, this movie is really bad and definitely deserves other criticisms, but I'm going to tell you why that is the case by going into this movie and giving it a closer look.
Okay, so despite the fact that this film has an expansive cast of characters, it somehow feels smaller and less well thought out compared to its predecessor. Only two actors from the first film returned, as previously stated, and that was very detrimental to the final product. The chemistry between Liu Kang and Katana should have been blossomed as the film went on. But nope, it felt rushed to the point where he says that his heart belongs to her. Liu Kang's love for Katana in the games makes sense because they had time to grow as friends and eventually lovers. I get that you can't exactly do that in a film with only 90 minutes to spare, but you could have at least made it feel like something. Moving on to the other characters, Sonya wasn't as good because Sandra Hess isn't as good as Bridget Wilson was in the first film. And she's also not as tough as imposing as I would have wished for her. Her fight scenes were kinda lame, and her personality felt inauthentic, and that's a word you're gonna hear a lot in this review. I mean, they give her the kiss of death, which I guess is something, but it's still not a great portrayal. Moving on to Raiden, while I really like James Remar as an actor, he is not Raiden. If Christopher Lambert didn't fully embody the character in the previous film, why would Remar be any better? He also just feels inauthentic to Raiden too. He feels a lot more loosened up, so he's, I guess, the same as the original, but more loosened up than the previous film. And he also has a crappy haircut later down the line. This was just a bad call for our favorite Thunder God, and that really annoys me. And then there's Jax, and he might be the most annoying character in this entire movie, simply because he's so great in the games, and they made him the annoying sidekick. Again, the inauthenticity is all I felt when watching this, and I feel like we could have further fleshed out Sonya and Johnny Cage's relationship more if they didn't force Jax into the movie, and that brings me into one of the biggest problems the film has to offer. It will bring in a popular character from the games for only a few minutes of screen time, and then that character will disappear for the rest of the movie or die completely. Don't believe me? Here's very proof of that right now. Johnny Cage dies in the first 5 minutes, then we have the reason why Lyndon Ashby didn't return for this film. The Cyberlin Quay show up for a decent fight scene and then just die. Baraka has a cameo and dies. Melina has a cameo and dies. We see 3 Saurian warriors that are easily defeated. Kuai Liang's Sub-Zero shows up and then completely disappears. Nightwolf shows up and then completely disappears. Scorpion shows up and then completely disappears. Rain is completely wasted. And Jade feels like an afterthought. On the one hand, their abrupt deaths or disappearances kind of make sense, since this is Mortal Kombat and that happens all the time. But on the other hand, why introduce characters into the story for them to do one cool thing and then completely leave the rest of the movie? Everything set up in a story has to be paid off in the end, and if it isn't, and that is a sin that some of the worst films have ever made, and that immediately should be a red flag for this one. Now, let's move on to the villains of the movie. Let's start with Motaro, Shiva, and Ermac. These iconic fighters and characters from these games don't really have something memorable about them. I don't remember that much, apart from their petty argument and their piss-poor ways of getting taken out. That's it. At least Goro, Reptile, Sub-Zero, and Scorpion each had their parts to play in the first film, and they left huge impressions. I don't know what happened here, but I don't like it one bit. For Queen Sindel, apart from her first line that has been memed to death, she's just a cheesy villain that reminded me way too much of Rita Repulsa from Power Rangers. Musetta Vander is clearly having a blast, but that's all I can say about her performance. This hooded figure is supposed to be Shinnok, but not only is he not mentioned by name, he also looks nothing like Shinnok. They took Mortal Kombat's best villain and turned him into a generic overarching antagonist, which was not the treatment he should get. But then there's the biggest sin of them all, Shao Kahn. What they did to Shao Kahn makes me so angry that I don't even want to talk about him. All I can say is that the ruthless and imposing Emperor of Outworld becomes a generic whiny little brat played by Brian Thompson. Here's to hoping the new one does him more justice. So yeah, none of these characters were even okay. These are piss poor adaptations, and we've gotten redemption for some of them, but it is detrimental to think that this is the best they had to offer back in 1997. And I know it sounds like I'm stammering and stuttering all over my words, but that's only because I'm so furious at this movie. Now let's move on to something slightly less negative. The production design, for the most part, is pretty impressive. And the sets look pretty good, as do the costumes when they are actually used. However, when they are actually in the movie, they are overlooked because of the crappy CGI that overtakes the rest of it. Which, considering the fact that this came out after big budget films like Jurassic Park were on the big screen, is a bloody disgrace. And that includes the crappy battle with these 2 video game dragons, which is ironic because this is a film based on a video game! Moving on to the music, what was weird to me was that it utilized a mix of game sounds, but also licensed tracks that took away from the experience, especially Leave You Far Behind, which bothered me quite a lot. Finally, there's the action, and the only two good action scenes were the underground battles and Sonya and Jax versus Cyrax. The rest of it is unimpressive, forgettable, and even hard to look at. I'm so done talking about this movie. Mortal Kombat Annihilation is not just a bad sequel, but this is also a terrible movie on its own. Despite the fact that it's supposed to be authentic to the fans of the games, ironically, it is one of the biggest middle fingers to MK fans I've seen. Way more than Mortal Kombat Mythology Sub-Zero and Mortal Kombat Special Forces, because at least those games had something interesting going for them. For this film, I only have two things to give it, and that is Scorpion's Kunai to the Heart and a well-deserved 1 out of 10. This is the annihilation of something, alright, and it is, for sure, the film franchise.
Well, thank God that's over with. Yeah, if you want the live-action films from the 90s to watch, I guess, stick with the original and don't bother with this. It's a waste of time and sanity. Here's to hoping I watch something good next week. Until then, and with that said, my name is Mr. CCS, this is Movie Central, and that, my friends, is a wrap. See you next week.